Hola, minasan! Welcome back for another round of MechWarrior Battletech research. We are going to cover the Federated Suns over at Grimdark Narrator. Links down in the description below. This is the last house to cover, and then we'll continue on with the First Secession War over on Sven Vanderplank's channel to finish off. And then we're going to start tapering down on the research so that way I can make room for other research. Saying like I'll still revisit once we're done. With the First Secession War, I will revisit, but I do need to make room for other research videos. So just I'll give you all the heads up on that, because there's plenty of other franchises out there, and yeah, it's been a remarkable year covering BattleTech, I gotta say. But we'll get there when we cross the bridge. Right now, we gotta finish the last house, the Federated Suns, House Davion, and complete the First Secession War and see the rest of the horrors that came upon that war. So get your notes together for my post-research thoughts. This is a call to action. Comment, like, subscribe, follow, hit the notification button, and let us begin the research. Grimdark Narrator presents Battletech Lore, Federated Sons of House Davion. Founded in 2317, the Federated Sons was the brainchild of the Davion family, an influential noble family of the world of New Avalon. The father of the Federated Sons was Lucien Davion.
Hello there, my fellow Inner Sphere politicians.
Hello!
And welcome to another new faction lore video from the Battletech universe. We are more or less halfway done with these major faction and states introduction episodes, with only 2 more to be done after this one. However, after I'm done with those, I might do 1 or 2 videos about the Star League and/or Comstar. Returning to today though, we are going to learn quite a few things about the Federated Sons of House Davion. I am your host, the Grimdark Narrator, and without further ado, let us proceed, shall we?
Let's do it.
The Federated Sons has traditionally been the most powerful and largest of the successor states to occupy the Inner Sphere. From their ancestral home on New Avalon, the scions of House Davion have ruled the Federated Sons ever since its founding by Lucien Davion in 2317. While tracing their family line back to French and English nobility of ancient Terra and ruling as constitutional monarchs, the Davions have always positioned themselves and the Federated Sons as champions of liberty, democracy, and personal freedom in the Inner Sphere.
That's funny, given that's a monarchy.
This has bred a sense of righteousness in the Davion cause, serving as both a source of strength and weakness throughout their history. During the Commonwealth Wars, the Federated Sons fought heavily with the Capellan Confederation and the Draconis Combine. During the 3024 to 3029 period, there was a secret pact formed between the Federated Sons and the Lyran Commonwealth, in addition to the public alliance between Hans Davion and Katrina Steiner. In 3056, the Federated Commonwealth was officially formed, but the Lyran Commonwealth seceded from the alliance in just 3057, beginning the Fedcom Civil War. The Federated Commonwealth was officially renamed back to the Federated Sons in 3067 by Regent Yvonne after the conclusion of the Fedcom Civil War.
Dang.
The First Prince. The First Prince is the leader of the Federated Sons and the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Federated Sons, also shortened to AFFS. The First Prince has the right to appoint or dismiss any noble or government official and may rule by decree, though there are some limits when it comes to the rights and freedoms of the nobility and the people. Only a member of House Davion may become a First Prince, but only if they have achieved 20 years of age and have served at least 5 years in the military.
Oh, that's
Beyond
good.
their official powers, much of the strength of the First Prince lies in House Davion's personal wealth. While official figures are not made public, In 3025, it was believed they owned vast landholds on at least a dozen worlds.
I find it very interesting. So the Federated Suns is more of a principality, since the first prince is the one that runs the whole thing, and I'm very curious if they have like a first princess. So far, I'm liking that they're linked to English and French Earth, and find it funny that they claim themselves to be one for democracy when they're really a monarchy and operating under they're a constitutional monarchy. I just find it funny. I just find it funny that they're like it's like they're trying to pass off freedom under the guise of the constitutional monarchy, in a sense. If that makes sense, like it's a cover, smokescreen type of thing, but in fact it's really absolute rule by the first prince. Boy, they went through a lot of wars too, and even though they had united with the Capellans, the Lyrans, united with the Lyrans, it didn't last very long. But that is definitely something straight out of history, our own history. When how you say, who was it that made the alliance in Europe? Like that, those are European alliances. But then, like Austria-Hungary, there we go, Austria-Hungary. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. You know, you had Austria, you had Hungary, but then they teamed up and became the Austrian, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. See, there we go. You know, like that. Also, how did the French and the English actually team up? I thought they hated each other's guts.
Including the so-called Golden Five, and were also major shareholders in at least 20 mega-corporations. The first prince may also bestow the title of Prince's Champion on any individual, but traditionally a senior AFFS Field Marshal, who is either a trusted friend or family member, to act with their authority on military and political matters when the first prince is unavailable. It should be noted that the term prince is gender neutral in its Federated Suns usage.
Oh, okay.
Although both Catherine Steiner Davion and Yvonne Steiner Davion style themselves as the feminized princess in their titles. The first prince is also surrounded by a royal court, a term which refers to two distinct concepts. The first is the physical building complex surrounding the royal palace on New Avalon, in which are housed the ministries which see to the running of the Federation. The second is the social season held every spring for 3 months, where nobility and political leaders from across the realm are invited to the royal palace to partake in grand balls, game hunts, and some wheeling and dealing.
Snobs.
The Privy Council. Created by Alexander Davion as an alternative to the High Council, the Privy Council is a group of the highest advisors to the First Prince, and is very important in the running of the day-to-day affairs of the state. Acting as the advisory council to the First Prince, the Privy Council was given many of the powers once held by the High Council, recommending military and government appointments, overseeing the running of the state bureaucracy, and determining the line of succession or the appointment of a regent upon the death or retirement of the first prince. The Privy Council is a small body, and most of its members naturally reside on New Avalon, allowing it to react quickly to new events.
Makes sense.
So when needed, members may also empower a deputy to speak on their behalf. From the military are seated the Prince's Champion, the Marshal of the Armies, and the heads of the 8 military departments. The President and the elected member of the High Council also sits on the Privy Council. Lastly, the ministers in charge of each of the 8 ministries, which oversee the governing of the Federated Suns, also sit on the Privy Council. The High Council. The High Council was formerly a governing body equal to the President, and for a time, the first prince of the Federated Suns. Every member world and associate world was represented on the council with a delegate. Among those members, they elected a president to serve until life or impeachment by 3/4 of the High Council. It had the power to appoint representatives to foreign governments, approve treaties, and enact laws. As the High Council grew in size, the limitations of interstellar travel and communication made it slow and unwieldy in responding to new events. The High Council eventually became nothing more than a rubber stamp for the Davions, until it began to fail even in that regard, as it became bogged down in parliamentary maneuvering. While most of its powers have since been transferred to the First Prince and the Privy Council, the High Council still acts as a forum to debate policy, put forward recommendations, and enact regulatory changes.
Okay, so basically, the Privy Council, so let's see, the Privy Council is similar to the Cabinet. If we're gonna make real world comparisons, the Privy Council would be the Cabinet, and the High Council would be Parliament. But they get to elect a president. Surprising that there'd be a president rather than a prime minister. But they would elect the president to lead the High Council. And they would take care of basically the rubber stamping parts. And they would be the ones that would also be elected by the people. So there's the democracy part. So it's pretty close to the United States. Just a little bit more British and French. That's pretty interesting. I'm kind of wondering how the laws work. Their judicial branch now.
In terms of the military power, the Federated Suns is one of the most powerful nations in the Inner Sphere. The first princes of House Davion have always been committed to the armed forces of the Federated Suns, which is a highly trained, disciplined, and professional force, benefiting greatly from the technological advances of the New Avalon Institute of Science. Every heir apparent is required to serve in the military in order to be eligible for the title of First Prince.
Fair
A
enough.
major characteristic that distinguishes the AFFS from any other Inner Sphere military has for a very long time been the organizational efficiency with which they operate. This is evident in the manner in which the disparate elements of the military coordinate and work well together, a shared spirit of teamwork making the whole greater than the sum of its parts. The large size of the Federated Suns, both in terms of territory and population, has historically given it incredible growth potential compared to other successor states. Unfortunately, this same size has also been its biggest drawback. With resources spread across hundreds of light years of space, it can be difficult to exploit those resources and get them to market in a timely fashion.
I wonder if that's the same problem Russia had.
Despite boasting in 3025 the largest commercial fleet in the Inner Sphere. The union with the Lyran Commonwealth brought about a brief golden age of economic growth and recovery from the ravages of the succession wars, though the onset of the clan invasion and the civil war brought that to an end. The Federation economy is based on capitalistic principle.
There we go.
While large interstellar corporations may feature prominently, it is the small businesses which make up the majority of its gross national product. House Davion has also championed the rights of the average worker and made efforts to balance the needs of the people against those of the wealthy special interests. The Chancellery of the Exchequer, a subdivision of the Ministry of Ways and Means, is not only responsible for minting the pound, but also regulating and enforcing economic law, such as setting national interest rates, collecting taxes, and overseeing the Transfederation stock and commodities exchange. This includes dispatching sheriffs of economic policy, colloquially known as the business police, who have the authority to overturn a whole planet's economic laws and arrest violators in the name of the Federation.
Wow.
In
Business
spite
police.
of rules and regulations to keep their power in check, business leaders are still able to exercise an outside influence on public policy, directly contributing to political campaigns and forming advisory groups to lobby on their behalf. Such is the case that many can seemingly act with impunity for years before public outcry forces the government's response, and many citizens can be forgiven for thinking that these captains of industry are able to dictate terms even to the first prince. In sharp contrast, the power of labor unions may have severely curtailed since the early days of the Federation, when the most powerful could even buy or sell political appointments on major worlds. The unions overreached themselves during the early years of the Succession Wars, when the United Congress of Steel and Service Workers went on strike. At a time with the survival of the nation at stake, First Prince Paul Davion declared the strike illegal, arrested the leaders, and permanently disbanded the UCSSW. All the unions were banned from making any political contributions, as were any labor strikes which could affect a vital industry.
Wow, that's one way to prevent communism. Keep the union workers from rising up. Start screaming. Spread the production of the means and all that stuff. Yeah, this is definitely even though it's very fascinating that the lore meisters chose to use Britain and France as a source material. There we go. Source material for House Davion, but they peppered in U.S. I say aspects. There we go. Aspects of U.S. Law, I guess. No, not law, but like aspect of U.S. economy. There we go. Economy. It's pretty interesting that basically the all three are put together. You know, that the three were merged together into House Davion. You know, from democratic voting to business rights, small business rights, while maintaining the like British parliamentary type stuff. I don't know what France got on their end that contributes to the whole thing. That's French, but probably the whole, I don't know, maybe French Revolution type sentiments, revolutionary sentiments. I don't know, but it's very interesting. This is a very, very interesting house. Very interesting house, indeed. Also, that's a pretty awesome looking mech there. Like, that is a hardcore looking mech. I like that design. What is that? Let me know in the comments below what that design is.
Society and culture. The Federated Suns presents an interesting contrast between what it stands for and its actions. On one hand, the citizens of the Federation enjoy many freedoms denied to people elsewhere in the inner sphere and beyond. The freedom to express themselves, to worship how they please, to participate in government and join political parties. Even the less well-off will take pride in their constitutional rights and contrast it with what they see as virtual slavery suffered by those in the neighboring realms.
Oh no.
However, a deeper look at the actions and history of the Suns casts some doubt on their claims of democratic ethics. Idealism has often had to give way to practicality, with the stratification of society, especially with regards to the influence of the warrior elite, making the Suns less open to pure democracy than they claim. Economic disparity between the rich and the poor is greatly pronounced within the Suns, with the wealthy taking little heed of those in need, whether because they believe everyone lives prosperously or have only themselves to blame for that condition. Part of the blame rests in the sheer size of the Federation.
It's very big.
In 3025, the realm included over 500 inhabited star systems.
500
spread over
systems?
hundreds of light years of space. presenting a task which would strain even the best of social services. This is not helped, though, by the fact that the military expenditures make up a significant portion of the national budget, leaving relatively little for other services. A pro-military attitude reinforced by public education means that few are actually willing to criticize this state of affairs or even acknowledge it as a problem in the first place. Indeed, pride in both their freedom and the military which defends it leads many Federation citizens towards arrogance, believing that their way of life is morally superior.
Are we sure this is based on Britain and France? This seems to hit way too close to home here. What's being explained about the culture and society. Way too close here.
This dichotomy can also be seen in the Federation education system. Despite the ravages of the succession wars, in 3025 the Federated Suns boasted over 50 universities and other institutes of higher education, all regarded as the best learning centers in the entire inner sphere. Perhaps the most famous of these is the New Avalon Institute of Science, founded by Hans Davion with the specific goal of recovering technology lost in the fires of the succession wars. Within 2 decades of the Institute's founding, the Federated Suns could claim to be the most technologically and military advanced among the successor states, with many advances slowly trickling down to the civilian sector to raise the general standard of living. At the same time, the Federated Suns has, historically, the lowest education attainment rate of any of the successor states.
Gosh, that's
With
too
public
close.
education largely in the hands of local governments, this has naturally led to different opportunities and outcomes available. As such, while someone living on one of the golden worlds might have access to the best academies money can buy, a person living in the underdeveloped outback might be lucky to have access even to primary education. The Federated Suns is committed to allowing freedom of religion to its citizenry, and while a variety of old and new faiths are practiced, a few of them are regarded as more prominent than others. The largest is Christianity, with many different sects split largely between Protestantism and Catholicism.
Of course.
Practitioners of Islam are largely concentrated along the border with the Draconis Combine, while Sunni and Shia sects face little discrimination. Those of the Azami tend to face greater persecution for their attributed allegiance to the Combine. Likewise, Hinduism is the most active in the area of Davion space, once encompassed by the United Hindu Collective. Lastly is the Unfinished Book movement, which seeks to incorporate the wisdom of multiple faiths into one overarching work, the eponymous Unfinished Book.
That's funny. Are we sure this is about, this is based off of England and France, Britain and France, UK and France, whatever they want to call themselves? Because this feels more like the United States than anything else. Everything he described on the culture and education part, way too close to home there. That is a little too close to home, you know. That sounds very familiar. An amalgamation of all three countries, that makes perfect sense, you know. That's pretty cool, you know what I'm saying, because Britain became a constitutional monarchy. Of course, the United States broke away from Britain. France had the French Revolution, you know, and all three are 3 different examples of, I guess one would say, democracy. You know, a constitutional republic, a monarchy, a constitutional monarchy, and whatever France is. I don't know what France is, quite honestly. I guess it's a straight democracy, but either way, all 3 of them carried the same principles that that was brought about in the Enlightenment. That is the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, freedom of expression, rights, inalienable rights, human rights, all that kind of stuff here. But the House Davion comes off a little bit more tame. still. You know what I'm saying? They come off a little bit more on the tame side compared to all the others. It's not a perfect system or anything. It's not a perfect system, but the fact that there is some level of freedom, that sense of freedom. I don't want to get into the politics. No. I don't want to get into the politics. Let's just talk about how the lore masters did a good job incorporating all of this together, because you're talking about taking three aspects of three distinct aspects of three different countries and having them put together. It's really more like a principality than anything else, since the ruler is a prince. And he has he does have some level of absolute rule, despite having a parliament. The entire structure is very interesting. The Privy Council and the High Council operating sort of like a sort of like one side is the executive branch and the other side is the legislative branch. Would have been nice to know about the judiciary branch. I'm surprised that the lore masters didn't come up with that for their world build. The education system, hilarious. The business part is very interesting, because small businesses make up the majority of the GDP for the Federated Suns, while even though the top corporations have the big influence. It's a very interesting approach that the lore masters went with. Of course, the unions got a little dumb with their protests and got stamped out. But the fact that there's a Ways and Means committee that administers the business police is pretty fascinating. I wonder what that would be like if that was actually applied in the real world, where there's actual police officers for economics, that actually enforces the laws on corporations and companies that, well, basically screw up, that do bad things, corrupt things, bury toxic waste in a school, in a children's school playground kind of thing, and leave things all, toxic, like damage of the environments and such. That'd be very fascinating. And I know it's a little tough for the lore masters to really pinpoint focus on, focusing and centralizing on a single house, in a sense. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sure there's the books that focus on that and everything out there, some novels and such, but they did a pretty, I gotta say, they did a pretty good job, working it all out and finding a good balance so that the world build doesn't come off skewed, doesn't come off too on the nose, even though it looks like it's on the nose. I think they want something. I don't know what it is, but but it comes off like the lore masters wanted to have a United States, but feared that the direction that they were going, the education system, the economic system, might have been a little too on the nose, and they decided to also incorporate Britain and France with Parliament and a monarchy, just to smooth it out. But that would have been hilarious if they would have just stuck to just being Space USA. stuck to Space USA. And I guess that's why they didn't. I guess, as Grimdark Narrator pointed out, it was just English and France in terms of the past. Where the past originated from, when they were on New Terra and they flew up into space. The French and the British, teamed up and moved up there. Saying, and they chose to just focus on that and not go with USA. I could see that, because there's too many elements that is way too much like the United States. Way too many elements, but I think they just wanted to be nice. They just wanted to play nice, but honestly, they should have really leaned in. If it was their original intent, in terms of writing, and have the Federated Suns be the United States, they should have leaned in. Keep in mind, we don't take it that personal. We don't take it that personal. We just laugh at it and be like, Yeah, that's true. We'd be like, on point. We'd be like, good point. It's very good, a very well, interesting built faction here. Very interesting, well built house. I like it. I like it. How does a constitutional monarchy with democracy, with elements of democracy, operate in space? And we see it's very well balanced out. You know, they're not perfect by any means. You know, but when has any political entity ever been perfect? Like, you know, it's indifference. There's you know, yes, there are some bad politicians. You know, there's some bad politicians, but you know, there's also politics that are of indifference or is just laser guided, focused on the results and such. I mean, it's so complicated, and the lore masters, you know, are doing their best to do the politics, but without being on the nose or direct. I could really see that. I could really see that. Like, they're trying to not incorporate real world politics, but try and do fantasy politics. Try and do fantasy politics, and fantasy politics is a little tricky to do. It's very difficult to do because because viewers, readers, you know, anybody who watches, they'll be like, oh, that's an allegory for the United States, and then they start over analyzing everything. But you're trying to not be the United States. You're trying to not be France or England or Russia or Japan or South Africa or Zimbabwe or Brazil or Argentina, or Australia, New Zealand. Every other country. You know, you're not trying to you're trying to not be an allegory for these countries, but unfortunately it's unavoidable for the most part in writing. For the most part in writing, it is pretty much unavoidable because yes, you can do fantastical politics, but the problem is that how each of us in our respective countries were born and raised within the political influence is something that we're going to have biases with when we start writing, and it's very difficult to try and write about another country's politics when you have zero experience in that country's politics. Politics, and then try to incorporate that into your writing, and especially if you try to do like a fantasy story, like a high fantasy. If you notice, most high fantasies usually have politics that are reflective of the ancient times of that writer's respective history. So, like for example, Japan, the politics would be, you know, if it's fantastical samurai ninja story, you're gonna have the influences of, say, the shogun or the early days of the empire, or the Bakumatsu period, you know, the Warring States period. With Britain or France, it would be reflective of the monarchies of those times. You know, King Louis or King William the Conqueror. You know, saying what those politics are like, and so on. You know, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to not make fantastical politics without some layer of actual real world politics seeping in, because we don't have we're not enlightened. You know, we're not you know, we just don't have I don't want to say we don't have the means of creating an entirely new politic, but the thing is that for me personally, I'll speak from experience personally, I don't want to delve into politics in my creations, you know what I'm saying, my writings and such, you know, intellectual properties. You know, saying like I don't want to make fantastical politics, primarily because again, people will misconstrue, misinterpret, or overanalyze, and they're gonna try to want to connect it with real world politics, not realizing that it's not supposed to be real world politics; it's that world's politics. You know, it's very difficult. It's extraordinarily difficult, and sometimes you just want to avoid it unless you're doing a political thriller. If you're doing a political thriller, you know, a political story, an espionage story, then yeah, you got to deal with the politics and such, and you're most likely to. But when it comes to world building, you know, it's fine to have the politics. Now, Battletech, politics is very prominent, and that's why that's why it's so weird when you have Federated Suns, and they're like, yeah, it's you got a crown, you got this prince running the whole thing, but they also got all this, all these elements from the United States incorporated into it. So you end up with a mishmash, and it comes off. I wouldn't say it's interesting how they decided to go with it, but it's just weird how it comes out. It's a little weird. Saying it doesn't feel fantastical in that sense. Warhammer, I know I'm jumping into another franchise, but Warhammer pretty much did a good job with its fantastical politics, because everybody's an a-hole. Everybody's an a-hole. Such a weird extreme, but nevertheless, they did a good. This is a very interesting group. I'll probably more further research later down the line. We'll see what they really how they really operate. So yeah, that's it. The fifth and final house of the Inner Sphere, Great House of the Inner Sphere. Research. So now I have caught up with everybody, and it's time to finish up the First Succession War, because now I got a good idea of what these 5 houses are all about. So yeah, pretty good. I really like the 5 houses. They're very unique, very distinct. Very distinct. They stand out on their own. There's no overlap, no redundancy, and so on, and they really fit well within the timeline that the lore masters made. They did a very good job, like having House Davion and Lyran, becoming a single thing in the history books, and then they split off. Like those type of incorporations, they did a fantastic job, and was able to have a flow through the timeline, through the historical timeline, nicely. This is a very good. Their timeline structure, I would say, is a very good example to use if you want to do fantasy history. Saying like you want to create fantasy history for your timeline in your works. I would say that this is a good example of executed historical timeline, fantastical timeline. I would highly recommend it. Any writer that wants to put emphasis on historical timelines for their fantasies or sci-fi, I would say check out Battletech Mech Warrior, and see how they did their historical timeline, and how they track it and everything, to give you an idea and such like that. So yeah, there we go. All right. So head on over to Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com and grab yourself a copy of The Impossible Man, a strange fantasy novel written by me. You'll find links to the book down in the description below, along with links to other merch such as pins, stickers, t-shirts, music. Enjoy the products. Thank you for your patronage. And if you happen to have a copy of The Impossible Man novel and did a lore video on it, thank you very much. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on it. And if you're interested, you can join me on my live multi-stream on Twitch and Kick every Monday through Thursday, 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where I do lore research, Japanese cultural studies, gaming, and more. Look forward to hanging out with you. So until the next round of Battletech Mech Warrior research, thank you all for joining me, and wish you all a good night, a buenas noches, and oyasumi nasai.